Assalamualaikum. So inshallah, for any questions you have, obviously we'll have a open Q&A and you can raise your hands and ask. But if anybody wants to ask anonymously, we have QR codes. I'm just gonna and cue cards as well, so you can write it in and drop it into the box, and we'll answer the questions. Or you can scan the QR code and send it in online, and he can answer the questions that way as well. I'm just gonna drop off some pens, so feel free at any time to just scan or come up and write it and drop it in, and inshallah we'll have a Q&A portion at the end.
I'll just have to click the. Would you prefer if I just sit here? Yeah, if you could. Yeah, yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay. Yeah. Okay, assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Adnan. Today's talk is entitled Beyond the Scale, and the discussion is on changing the way we approach weight loss. The reason though I wanted to have this talk was more so to be able to, we live in a bit of an information age. A lot of information is accessible to us by our fingertips, and I think especially the people in this room and more people are very invested in their own health. And the problem I think that we struggle with in the in the digital age is not a lack of information, but too much information. And as a physician, I see the dangers of applying data without a conceptualized framework. And I see that on a very regular basis, especially when it comes to weight loss, an issue that afflicts many people around the world. Next slide. So about me, we'll just click through. I'll let you know, I'll point. So I'm an emergency room physician, first and foremost. I'm the medical director of an occupational health clinic, and my baseline training is in family medicine. And what I really do on a day-to-day basis in my medical practice is I'm actually a firefighter. I put out fires. When people have health issues, I don't prevent them. And unfortunately, I don't get paid to prevent them. And more often than not, when people come to seek my help in the emergency room, they're not actually looking for prevention. They're looking for a solution to that fire in that moment. And what I feel like my value is today is to prevent the fire. And I know we all struggle with this in some way, shape, or form. So I'm hoping that that's what the bigger takeaway is, like how do we prevent this from happening in the first place? So any conflicts of interest? None, meaning I'm not really getting paid for this talk. Next slide. So the agenda is we're going to define what obesity is. Then we're going to talk about some of the common weight loss strategies that I see a lot of people employ on a regular basis. Then we're going to talk about, well, why is it really hard to lose weight? Because that's the crux of the matter. The pitfalls and the challenges that people are facing is very common. It's common things that people get stuck at. And finally, I'll talk about an alternative strategy to weight loss, and that's really, again, this different way of looking at it as an entity. And then I'll leave a Q&A session for about 30 minutes. There's a couple of QR codes at the front here. If you did want to answer or ask a question anonymously, there are some cue cards as well that you can drop into the boxes. And inshallah, we'll get to all the questions as well. So some of the lesser known risks of excessive weight. we all kind of know why obesity is important to tackle as a society, and even us individually. We don't want to have heart attacks. We don't want to have strokes. For a lot of people, that's kind of where it begins and where it ends, the driving motivation. And so what I see happen is people have had their first heart attack or they've had their first stroke, and that's when they really start to get serious about real meaningful lifestyle changes, when the problems actually happened. And so what I wanted to highlight with this slide is that there are many other reasons why excessive weight on us can cause problems. And they're a little bit more sinister. We don't realize them so much. It's not as dramatic as a heart attack or a stroke. Some things, the first one that I see most commonly is chronic pain, usually in the form of some form of osteoarthritis. So it could be in the hips, it could be in the back, it could be in the neck. And this changes people's lifestyles. They're not able to sit on the floor anymore. They're not able to partake in the activities with their families that they once enjoyed because of physical pain. And anybody who lives in chronic pain will tell you that it is not an affliction that anybody would want to wish on their worst enemy. Second is cancer. It's not as commonly known that excessive adipose tissue or excessive weight on our bodies can be an increased risk factor for certain kinds of cancers, believe it or not. Not all of them, but some of them. I've listed a handful of them out there. Finally, there's another one, sleep apnea, which is really when you stop breathing at night, at sleep. And so it's like, okay, well, what's the big deal with sleep apnea? There's a lot of cardiovascular risks associated with sleep apnea, but for you, how it might show up in your life is you're not having restful sleep. You wake up the next day and you're just tired, you're groggy, you don't really know why. You're not able to think straight. And studies have shown time and time again that the cognitive decline that happens with people who are underslept, or if there's a complete night of sleep deprivation, that cognitive decline is equivalent to having a blood alcohol level of 0.05. So effectively as if you're drunk. And if you can imagine, if you're especially working in a cognitively demanding job, the impact it's going to have on your overall performance, your ability to make money, your ability to perform well in school, and to be a contributing member of society. So sleep apnea, if it affects your sleep that much, it trickles over into your daily life. And you may or may not realize it. And finally, God forbid, if you ever have to seek my services, which I would hope you don't, it's more challenging for me and my colleagues to be able to treat you effectively. A very simple affliction that can affect anybody is something like appendicitis. Inflamed appendix, it's got to come out, you got to have surgery for it. If you're relatively physically fit and healthy, you're going to have a fairly easy, rapid surgical recovery and outcome. But if you're overweight, you have excess tissue, the healing process can be really delayed. It leads in lost time to just recovery, lost time to ability to work, but then, God forbid, you might get a post-operative infection and abscesses and fistulas, and the list goes on, and this is not something I think the general public is really aware of, is that when a problem, it does hit, it will hit at some point in your life, your body is not going to rebound as effectively. And finally, there's links to excessive weight and poor mental health. And some of this is societal in nature, some of this is personal stigma, and I'll get into that later, but these, people who struggle with depression, anxiety, insomnia, it can also be, having excessive weight can be like a risk factor for just that. Adjust this?
It's just uncomfortable for you,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna move it a little bit like this. We do it this way. And then
Yep.
Is this a little bit better?
That's cool. Yeah. 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 So what is obesity? This is a definition from the Obesity Medicine Association. It's a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial neurobehavioral disease wherein an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction and abnormal fat mass physical forces, resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences. That's a lot. It's hard for me to explain just right off the bat what that means, but my hope is we're going to revisit this definition later on in the talk, and I'm hoping on a second read-through it'll make a little bit more sense. So what is obesity? Fine, it's a bit of a nebulous diagnosis right now, but how do we diagnose it in the medical world? Doctors will diagnose you based off of your BMI. And your BMI is something you've heard before. It's your body mass index. It is a very simple calculation, which is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared, and it spits out a number. And according to the World Health Organization, the number of, if you have a BMI of greater than or equal to 25, you're classified as being overweight. The next category is if your BMI is greater than or equal to 30, you're classified as being obese. This is a simple tool. It's a screening tool to check for obesity. So your height as an adult remains relatively static, but your weight will fluctuate. And so when you go to your family doctor for an annual checkup, one of the first things the nurses will do is get you on a scale so they punch that into your BMI. And the secret part of this that I don't think many people know is that even if your BMI is greater than or equal to 30, physicians don't really put that on your medical chart. They don't call you as they don't label you as being obese. And there's a whole lot of reasons for it. People feel ostracized. They feel ashamed when they have this as a diagnosis labeled that I'm medically obese. It's even though this is our screening tool to diagnose obesity, sometimes just providing the label without having effective solutions for that label, especially if the patient is not ready to accept the fact that they have a problem, we know it. We know it by just seeing it. We don't do anything about it sometimes. Issues with BMI, though, as a screening tool for obesity, is that it affects two big populations. And one is people who have large amounts of muscle, and the second is people who don't have enough, and that's a condition called sarcopenic obesity. This is a condition that I see most in my community. I'm Pakistani of origin, and people from our parts of the world, we don't have as much lean muscle mass genetically as people from other parts of the world. And so when we rely on a measure such as the BMI, a lot of people within our community get missed. And so this is where you hear stories about people who are, hey, they look great, they weren't really that overweight, and suddenly they had a heart attack in their 40s, and we wonder why. A lot of it is genetic related, but this is partly wise, because genetically we are not predisposed to putting on lean muscle mass. So the condition of having too much muscle, muscular hypertrophy, we see this a lot in athletes and bodybuilders. This is like a sliver of the general population. I'm not an athlete, I'm not a bodybuilder. I like to think I am, but I'm not. But here you have two individuals. The person on they're both the same height, they're both the same weight, and when you look at their BMIs, they're classified as being obese. But the person on the left is obviously more obese, and the person on the right is not. That's mainly because muscle weighs more than fat, and so it's going to adversely throw off your BMI to make you appear more obese than you actually are. Like I said, this is not a bigger issue in people because people who are physically fit, they don't pay much attention to their BMI anyways because they know they're healthy. The other condition is called, which is sarcopenic obesity, is also referred to as being metabolically obese normal weight. And again, this is what I see a lot in our community is people who are metabolically obese, meaning that their metabolic pathways function in the same ways as people who are struggling with having way too much weight. They're already having plaque formation within their coronary arteries. They're already having increase in insulin resistance, predisposing them to diabetes. They're already in that state, but you can't tell by looking at them. There's a condition known as skinny fat, widely underdiagnosed because BMIs don't pick it up. We don't even do much with the BMI as it is as medical professionals, even less so when we have people who have a normal BMI just kind of get swept under the rug. There's another screening tool called the waist to height ratio instead, which I personally like a lot better. Again, it's a very simple calculation that you can do at home. You just take a tape measure, you measure your waist, and you divide it by your height. And if that ratio optimally is supposed to be less than or equal to 0.5, meaning if you're about as half as tall as you are this way, as you are that way, it increases your propensity for long-term longevity and good health outcomes in the long-term future. With the waist, it's not a perfect ratio. It does fluctuate based off of gender. It does fluctuate a little bit based off of your race. So it's not a perfect tool, but I think it's a little bit better than a BMI. And then the next point is, which I love, is that there's no weight scale that's needed for this. A weight scale, if anything, if you're on a weight loss journey, I think, if anything, it's a bigger hindrance to you succeeding to lose weight, because all it is pain and misery. If you get on that weight scale and you've been doing everything right for a week and you look down at the scale and you haven't lost a pound, all it does is discourage you. So then how do we lose weight? So the big things that we talk about is lifestyle change, which usually falls into two categories of dietary and physical changes. And this is things that everybody knows about. Oh, go on the Atkins diet, paleo diet, whatever have you, do a certain exercise routine. You got to do HIIT training, you got to do CrossFit, whatever the case may be. This is what a lot of people know and talk about. And then the second are medical interventions. This is stuff that we all know and see. You go to a doctor, you're going to get a prescription for certain kinds of medications. We'll discuss some of the new players on the market, which I do think have a real role here. And the second is surgery of different forms. And again, there's a role for it. I wouldn't write it off entirely, but it really ought to be a last resort. So dietary changes, when we look at generalized dietary changes, again, obesity and being overweight is such a broad and vast topic that I would not be able to communicate what I would like to communicate if we dove really deep into the nitty-gritty of all of these things that I'm about to talk about. And so one of them is basic human metabolism. In basic human metabolism, we have 3 macronutrients, meaning these are energy sources of our body. The first one is carbohydrates, and generally it's supposed to act as a buffer for rapid energy use. Our day-to-day tasks of breathing, walking, eating, drinking, like our daily activity is usually that's what carbohydrates are typically for. They're stored in our muscle, generally, and they're stored in our liver. So people who are athletes, you hear about them doing carbo loading before like a big race or a marathon or a run because they need to make sure they have sufficient energy to meet rapid, on-demand requirements for energy. And within our body, when we consume too many carbohydrates, meaning it spills out of our muscle cells, our liver saturated with enough glycogen, then the excess gets stored as fat. The second macronutrient is protein. Protein generally serves some form of a function within the body. Our hair, our skin, our muscles, nails, these are all generally made of protein. And so this is the function of protein within our body. The other function of protein, there's some intra and intracellular signaling or that happens through enzymes or various hormones, or even within our immune system. So protein does play a role in that. And finally, we have fat. And fat is generally used as a long-term source of storing energy. If you consider it as a nuclear power plant, it's always on, it's always there. And if your body is in a somewhat healthy metabolic state, you're able to burn off low amounts of fat on an ongoing basis. The problem is when you're in a metabolically obese state, that state just shuts down. You're not burning fat at all on your day-to-day, and all you're doing is just accumulating it over and over again. That said, fat is not all bad. It also does play a role in intracellular signaling as well through hormones and, really hormones are usually made out of fat. The reason for the long-term storage of energy is because our bodies were not designed for this environment. Our bodies were designed to be able to survive in the environment of the past, where we did not have easy access to food sources. It was very common that we actually went through periods of feast and famine. And so as a compensatory mechanism for us to survive the periods of famine, our body had these biological adaptations to store fat, to get us through the winter months so that when it came time for us to be able to hunt or farm or whatever it was to get our food sources, that we would be able to survive. We don't have periods of famine anymore. So now in our society, our body doesn't know that, but it's still acting like it is. So then the dietary changes. So what do? It's like, all right, well, I got to clean up my diet. So you go online and you look up different diets. First one you'll come across is the Mediterranean diet. There's the low-carb diet. There's the Atkins diet, the paleo diet, vegetarian, and intermittent fasting. The Mediterranean diet of all of these various forms of dieting is the most widely studied diet. And this is the diet that consists of the people who live along the Mediterranean Sea. Diet relatively high in seeds, nuts, legumes. There's some alcohol consumption with the Mediterranean diet, not a lot of meat consumption, more fish consumption. And the difficulty when studying diets of like, is this diet effective or not, is because we can't do what are called randomized control diets on diets. A lot of these studies are prospective or retroactive studies, meaning we look at what people have done and then we try to make some kind of correlation to where they're at today. And so what they found is people who live along the Mediterranean Sea, they tend to live a little while longer. They tend to not have as high rates of obesity, and so therefore it's been touted as one of the best diets in the world. But even parts of the Mediterranean diet now are under scrutiny, and one of them is alcohol. Alcohol was thought to, or is thought to, prevent the formation of coronary artery disease and decrease the incidence of heart attacks. And now with more studies coming out, we're starting to come to this realization or understanding that actually the optimal amount of alcohol you should have in your diet is 0. And this is something that it doesn't encompass, it's not part of the Mediterranean diet. They drink wine with dinner on a regular basis. We don't. But as studies come out, like there's no diet that's perfect on this list. Next diet is low carb diet. The idea behind that is if you're not eating a lot of carbs, you're forced to burn your energy. Atkins diet is a play on this. It's just effectively almost all protein consumption. And it's actually quite good in people who have epilepsy and seizures. It's shown to decrease the risk of incidence of having more seizures. The paleo diet or the Paleolithic diet is known as kind of like the diet that our ancestors used to partake in when they used to hunt and gather, primarily composed of meat with some relatively raw fruits and vegetables as well. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum is the pure vegetarian diet, which has no meat and much more vegetables, plant-based needs, seeds, nuts, legumes, whatever. And now more recently, we've now fallen into intermittent fasting. It's a very exciting diet, and especially as Muslims, we gravitate towards this because, hey, we fast. Like we like this is right up our wheelhouse. And the idea behind intermittent fasting is that you have feeding windows that might be restricted to 8 hours, and then the rest of the time you're spending not eating. And without getting too much into the studies of it, the way we apply fasting in our day-to-day life as Muslims does not actually lead to weight loss. So the general thing that any person who's actually within the field of obesity medicine will actually be able to tell you is that the general dietary concept is that there's no one diet that works. And generally, you want to be increasing how much vegetables you're having, how much fiber you're having, how much fish, legumes, nuts, seeds. And we want to decrease overall highly processed foods. It's not that carbs are the enemy. There's a purpose for them, but we don't want very processed kinds of foods. Refined grains, sugars, anything that has a very, very long expiry date generally has a lot of preservatives, and our body metabolizes it quite differently. And we want to decrease how much we're eating. But again, none of this, what I'm sharing to you today, is rocket science. We all know this instinctively. We've heard it. There's nothing groundbreaking here. So, and then you're going to ask, obviously, well, what's the next best diet for weight loss? And the best diet is really the diet you can stick to, the one that you can stick to. When we think about diet, we think so much about, I want to get to here, and I want to do this over and over and over again, without realizing that the diet that we currently stick to that got us to the place that we're currently at, we've been doing it over and over again for decades. It's not going to flip in 1 or 2 weeks when you wake up and you're like, oh man, I really need to lose weight. It takes time. So you have to be slow and patient with how you change your diet. Any change you're going to instill in your life is going to come with it a period of challenge and struggle. And if you fall, the minute you start struggling, the minute you start failing with your diet and you abandon it, you can't stick to it anymore. And so I'm not a huge proponent in getting into a diet that's going to make you lose weight. It's very individual. It's highly dependent on what your preferences are, what your habits are, what your behaviors are. But the goal is not a perfect diet. It's just moving towards something better than what you're currently consuming. So dietary changes, and we look at physical activity changes. Resistance training, I got to get to the gym. I got to start lifting weight to burn muscle. There's high intensity interval training, and the general idea behind this is that you're training a thing called your VO2 max, which is your body's ability to consume oxygen and burn calories. The higher the VO2 max that you have, the more you can burn calories, the more fit you are as an individual. Olympic athletes have elite levels of VO2 maxes that the average population does not. There's zone 2 cardio, which is now coming up a little bit more and more. And zone 2 cardio is not really exercise. It's a physical activity change, but it's not really exercise in the way you think of it. Zone 2 cardio is generally defined as being about 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. And to calculate your maximum heart rate, it's a fairly simple equation. It's 220 minus your age. So if you're 40 years old, your zone 2 cardio rate, about 60 to 70% of that is about 110 beats per minute. And you would be surprised how little you have to push yourself to get yourself to around 110 beats per minute. You can make it 100 if you're 50. You might just have to be going on a little bit of a walk at about the pace that I'm going, and you're in zone 2 cardio. I'm burning fat right now without realizing, without having to work at it, without having to do it. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of people will look at zone 2 cardio and be like, oh man, like I gotta spend so much more time out of my day and I gotta get on a treadmill and start running. And zone 2 cardio really doesn't require much of that at all. You can incorporate that into your day-to-day life. And then finally, I wasn't entirely sure how to include this or if I wanted to include this, but social-based exercise. Really looks in some way, shape, or form of signing up to some kind of a class, an aerobics class, fitness class, yoga, CrossFit. These are all physical activity changes that you incorporate in your lifestyle, but you do it with other people. We're very social creatures. We're very behavioral in nature, and we tend to like being around people. No matter how much we say we hate them, we want to be with other people. And so the people that we associate ourselves with, our friends, our family, the more physically active we are with them, the easier it is for us to sustain like a healthier lifestyle. A lot of times it's hard to change the people at home. So what do you do is you go out, you pay some money, and you find a like-minded group of people like you who are trying to get in shape. Walking, running clubs, boating clubs. But there's a lot of other social-based exercises that actually do make meaningful changes towards weight loss. Then we've exhausted our lifestyle changes. Now we start looking at medical interventions. And the big new players on the market are these class of medications called GLP-1 agonists. And these are, GLP-1 is a glucagon-like peptide, which is some fancy schmancy hormone in your body. And it's designed to increase your, or decrease your insulin resistance, meaning allow you to bring sugar into your cells more effectively and reverse some of the effects of diabetes. Decrease appetite. There's a lot of different signaling that it does, but generally that's the idea, is make you less insulin resistant. So one of the medications called semaglutide originally is called Ozempic, and Ozempic has been around for a much longer period of time, and it's been used to treat people who struggle with diabetes for a very long period of time. And then they started doing studies on it. Well, what if we start upping the dose? And that's how we got to Wegovy. It's basically the exact same molecule, it's just a higher dose. And we found that with higher doses of these kinds of medications, people start losing weight. It suppresses their appetite, they become more insulin resistant, they start actually burning some fat now. The other medication is called liraglutide, Saxenda. Currently, these are all relatively new medications. If you have coverage for it, that's probably the most financially feasible option or way of getting these medications. But they actually have really promising effects in weight loss. The other one, the newest player on the market, is a GLP-1 agonist, but it also has another kind of hormone in there called gastric inhibitory peptide. And this increases feelings of satiety, meaning you take it, or if you have more gastric inhibiting peptide, you could eat the same amount of food and feel full faster. And so that combined with this GLP-1 agonist, we now have this other molecule called tirzepatide, or tirzepatide, or Mounjaro, which is its brand name, which again has better weight loss than the ones that preceded it. There's a caveat with these medications. They are helpful in the path to weight loss, but what we're finding, and I know this is going to be a much bigger topic later on down the line, is that as they find that people lose weight, the issue we're running into is it doesn't change body composition. People's muscle mass, they lose as much muscle mass, if not more, than they're losing fat mass. And so it decreases the overall weight, it decreases your BMI, it gets you out of those zones, but you're still metabolically obese. And if anything, you might be more metabolically obese after the fact, after you've been on these medications. But does it reduce fat? Does it reduce weight? Absolutely. Next slide. And then we get to surgical interventions, and these are, physicians or surgeons, despite what you may think, we don't want to cut you open. We'll do anything possible to prevent that. So we have much higher targets for somebody to undergo bariatric surgery. One of them is having a BMI greater than 40 on its own. And then the other is if you have greater than or equal to 35 and you have another weight-associated illness, sleep apnea, diabetes, things of that nature. And you've maximized, like there's a whole and list. But these are the two big ones from a medical point of view. If you've done those two things and you've maximized everything else you can do to try to lose weight, then you're a candidate for bariatric surgery. Different forms is adjustable gastric banding, where you put a band on part of the stomach. It reduces the capacity of the stomach. There's a sleeved gastrectomy, where again, they kind of almost cut out a part of the stomach and decreases the physical size within the stomach. There's a very complicated procedure called the Roux-en-Y bypass, which I'm not going to explain to you. This duodenal switch, and now they're starting to get into newer modalities, which are endoscopic, meaning a gastroenterologist will do it to put a tube down your esophagus, and they'll do a procedure that way. It could be laparoscopic. You could have percutaneous approaches. The issue with these interventions, at least as of how many of them are currently standing, is that if somebody who's had some kind of a gastric bypass shows up in my emergency room and they're complaining of stomach pain, I get a little bit worried, because even with a normal CT scan, these people have they can have the potential to have a lot of recurring and repeating medical side effects or complications. So again, this is not something that you would want to jump to. It is a last resort. There's a place for it, but again, it does come with its own separate set of risks. So then the question becomes, well, why is it hard to lose weight? So there's two general factors that I broke it down into, and then there's more factors underneath. The one is personal factors, and the other is social or environmental factors. Like this is, in my estimation, this is the meat and potatoes of this talk. Why is it hard to lose weight? Because everything we talked about before, a vast majority of you probably knew most of it. I don't think much of what I've presented up until this point has been brain surgery or rocket science. It's well known. This is the part where I really feel that is my value today. So the personal factors, we get into them. Give me the next slide. Is your current metabolic state. So if you're already not fit, if you're already a little bit overweight, your current metabolic state is already slow. It is already harder for you to lose weight just because of where you're at. So you can't compare yourself to somebody who's further along down the pipeline than you are. Second is human metabolism. This is just the way our bodies have been designed. I referred to this earlier. We were designed to sustain periods of famine. We don't exist within famine states anymore. But our human metabolism is designed in a way that when we go for periods of time where we're not eating a lot of food, our body starts freaking out and it's like, oh, we're not getting much food anymore. We're going to start shutting down a lot of these processes. Start getting really tired, you start getting really fatigued, but a lot of it is done intentionally to preserve energy. You want to hold on to whatever caloric resources you have in your body to sustain. It's just our body working against us in this modern environment. In Ramadan, we're not actually short of food. Go to any iftar, you'll know you're not short of food. But our body thinks we are when we go through a month like this. So our basal metabolic rates plummet, and this makes it even harder for us to burn calories, because our basal metabolic rate is really the furnace within us that helps burn off calories. And so when you get into restrictive diets or any kind of caloric deficit, it triggers this pathway. So it can be really easy. You'll lose weight in about 2 or 3 weeks. The pounds will come off. And then all of a sudden these biological mechanisms, these compensatory mechanisms will kick in, and then the weight scale stops moving. You're like, oh man, how do I do this? And so it becomes harder and harder. The second is negative self-talk. These are the voices, these are the things that we say to ourselves when we are not in a state of optimal physical fitness that is harming us and it's going against us. A lot of this is fed into by societal stigma. And society sees fat people or obese people as being bad in some way, shape, or form. There could be a flaw in their, that they're lazy, they're stupid, they're slow, unmotivated, whatever the case may be. The worst part of the stigma that actually exists is that there's a flaw in their character and their being, that they're somehow immoral. And this is something that society unfortunately perpetuates. What's harmful is when we hold this stigma as well, and without realizing it, many of us actually do. We all have our own implicit biases, whether we would like to admit it or not, but we hold these stigmas as well. And even about ourselves, even if we know we're a good person, we're not lazy, we're not unmotivated, this negative self-talk actually makes it much more difficult for you to sustain a lifestyle that is designed to move you away from being overweight. And then everyone has an emotional relationship with food. I do too. When I'm feeling down, I'm feeling a little bit tired and depressed, I've had a rough week, PC decadent chocolate chip and glass of milk, that's my go-to. That's my comfort food. So everyone has some form of comfort food. And there's an emotional relationship that we tie to it. In some instances, we do look to food for comfort. In some instances, it can become a problem if that's the only thing you have in your life to look to for comfort. And so the more sedentary we become with life, all of a sudden everyone's a foodie now. And you can be a foodie, and that's great. There's no problem with that until it becomes a problem. Until you're struggling with obesity, and maybe you need to start finding other things in your life that give you joy outside of food. Because we all have an emotional relationship with food. It's important to acknowledge that and recognize it. And as much as I did not want to put up this last point on this slide, because I do feel like in many ways people will use it as a bit of a cop-out, but it's there, it's undeniable, it's our genetics. Some people are just privileged to have genes that do not predispose them to gaining weight rapidly or quickly. I'm one of those people. I'd never really struggled with weight in my life. And there are other people who have not been blessed with a similar kind of genetics, and they've always had to struggle. And so this is an intentional personal factor that you have, that you may or may not have, that's making you more overweight or at risk of being overweight. It doesn't mean that that's it. Inshallah, the time will come where we're going to have gene-directed therapy. There have been multiple genes that have been identified and linked to obesity. We just don't have the medical treatment for it yet. But there are lifestyle interventions that you can do to offset your own personal genetics. So then we get into social and environmental factors. There's 3 big ones. One is our individual characteristics, like who are we as people, individuals within the society. It's broken down generally gender, race, and your socioeconomic status. With respect to gender, women, more so than men, because of the virtues of society, are more predisposed to weight gain than men are. They're going to struggle more with weight than men are. People who come from less privileged races or races that are looked down upon are going to have more struggles with obesity. And this is, again, due to a lot of these invisible social forces that are existent on that person. And then socioeconomic status. It's not any surprise that people who are poorer are going to struggle more with their weight than people who are wealthier. Then there's environmental characters. And this is the personal physical geography that we all live in. Where we live in. Right now, majority of us live within GTA. The factors are generally when we talk about geography, we're breaking it down into urban versus rural environments. Generally, urban environments, people who live in urban environments tend to have less rates of obesity compared to urban or suburban environments. More access to resources, the way the cities are laid out, and encourages a little bit more movement. If you lived in downtown Toronto or New York, you're walking everywhere. But if you live in Mississauga, you're driving everywhere. And so that change in your activity, your baseline physical activity, is making it harder for you to lose weight. This is just the way our societies are set up. If you look at your current neighborhood walkability score, generally countries or places, societies that have high walkability scores are associated with lower rates of obesity. If you want to look at meaningful change that we can do as a collective, is look at your walkability score in the neighborhood that you live in, where you grow up. And that's something to bring to the attention of your individual MP, of like, this is a meaningful change. This is a meaningful political, social change to help tackle this epidemic of obesity, not a lot of the other things that you'll hear on the news. This food availability. You don't have to look much further than across the street when we talk about fast food density. And the idea of fast food density is how many fast food restaurants do you have per square kilometer or square mile compared to a population of people. And we live in a relatively high or a relatively dense fast food environment. I think we do in most places within North America, but especially this part of the city, there's a lot of fast food shops, and the more it is, it's convenient, it's easier to get access to fast food. Access to nutritious foods. There's a caveat here. You think that, okay, well, if I go to a grocery store, I'm going to have more access to health foods or healthier foods or more nutritious foods. And the studies have shown that with groceries, it's not access or proximity to the grocery store. Just because you have more access to it does not mean you're going to go into that store and eat more fruits and vegetables, despite what you may think. It's been proven that it's not just a simple solution of, well, we need to have more grocery stores and less fast food stores. We get into portion sizes. Restaurants nowadays, it's not a surprise that gradually over time, the portion sizes have increased across the board. And this, again, this is an environmental factor that's leading us to put on more weight. And there's a very common myth here when it comes to the grocery food bit, is healthy foods are more expensive. Now, I get it. When you look at like something like Whole Foods, some really rich parts of the city, and people are of certain class are going to these stores and they're buying $5 stalks of celery. Yes, that can be more expensive. But a vast majority of healthy foods don't need to be that expensive. And they've done studies on this. This is a very common myth. It's been marketed by certain people in the food industry. There's a lot of people who have a lot of money to make when they market and produce hyper-palatable foods that you just can't compete. Like natural food cannot compete with a Doritos chip. There's nothing in nature that tastes as good as a Doritos chip. It's just not designed that way. But we have food scientists that do this, and so because of that, the marketing is, well, healthy foods are really more expensive. And when you look at it with price per calorie or price per gram, no doubt, healthy food is way more expensive than the standard American diet. But when you look at price per portion, it's not even close. And the issue is that the portion, if you look at a plate of salad, you're like, that's a portion of food. Do we sit down and eat a plate of salad? Probably not. And so because of that, because of the way we're consuming our foods, we're eating less of the healthy foods and more of the unhealthy foods. And we say, well, healthy food is really expensive. It's just we're not eating it. There's studies that will prove that actually show the numbers and data. And then transportation. How do we get around the city? How do we move? Do we have safe access to, do pedestrians have safe access? And you just look at where we're physically located. How do you get here without a car? How do you get here just physically? If you're going to walk, if you're going to bike here, do you have dedicated bike lanes or walkways that keep you separated from traffic to just get you here? Forget the weather for a second. There are countries that have the same weather, if not worse than ours, and yet they are much more physically active because of the way the city's infrastructure is set up. We live in a very car-centric society. It started in the US, we adopted it, we're the US junior, whether we like to admit it or not, and we follow very similar patterns. Our solution to traffic jams is more lanes on a highway. It's not more public transit, it's not better walkability, it's not restructuring of cities and design, but again, these are all social and environmental factors, these environmental factors specifically, that are contributing to making it harder for you to lose weight. And then finally, we're neighborhood deprivation. Alhamdulillah, I don't think in this neighborhood, at least, that we're struggling with that, but it's been shown that people who come from or live in neighborhoods of poverty, high crime rates, violence, they tend to have more obesity than not. And then finally, oh yeah, or work environment, almost forgot. Everyone who knows or been working since before and after COVID, we all understand what's happened is this whole increase in virtual work. And this has obviously declined our physical activity. Now we don't have to commute to get to work. We don't have to walk around quite as much. We can just do it at home in the comfort of our PJs. But also separately speaking with work, with our work environment, private industries have generally prioritized. There's been more and more jobs within the private industry that have now decreased one's ability to be physically active at work. The higher up you go, the less physically laborious or intensive your job is going to be. That's going to make it less time for you to even just be physically active. And that's another factor within our environment that contributes to increasing obesity. And then we're left with the last big clump, which is a social hierarchy. And we are social animals, we are social creatures, we exist within a social hierarchy, and there have been animal models on this that have studied this. The best we can do is drive correlation between the two. And generally speaking, animals that exist in a higher social hierarchy compared to animals that do not, they tend to do better in life long term. They live longer, they live healthier, and in humans, we're starting to see some forms of that. So one of the forms of that is this concept of having high activity inequality. And so what activity inequality is you have, just like the wealth gap, there's an activity gap. Meaning within a population, there are certain members of that population that move more on a regular basis, and there's certain members of the population who move less. There's always going to be some bell curve of how much movement or physical activity that happens within a population. The wider that that activity inequality is within a population, the more likely that population has to be at risk for obesity. And within the world, Canada is in the top 5 countries that have the highest activity inequality. We live in a very unequal society. And if you think about it, the people who really are physically fit, they're a little bit well off, and there's a lot of these people who live within the fitness industry themselves. They're the ones saying, "Oh, you got no excuses," and I do this, I show up every single day. But a vast majority of us, we don't make our money off of moving. I work in the ER, so I physically do have to move quite a bit, but my job is somewhat privileged in that sense, and a lot of people don't have that kind of physically laborious job. Perceived inequality, and what this means is that when you take people and you just label them as being poor, you take 10 people with the same amount of wealth and you label 2 or 3 of them as being poor, even if they are not, studies have shown that people who perceive inequality will consume more calories. And these are things, again, this is just human behavior, it's been studied. These are other factors, hidden factors that lead to increase in obesity. And then finally, food insecurity, which is really defined as inadequate ability to consume an appropriate quality or enough quantity of food within a household. And if one or more members within a home struggle with food insecurity, that whole home is at risk for increased levels of obesity. Again, that's been shown. Food insecurity is a much bigger problem within Canada than we like to admit that it is. It's probably existent in many people, even within this neighborhood. But that's another real problem that's contributing to excessive weight gain. So to try to put all of this together, what does this mean? Generally, when people approach weight loss, we look at it as this huge insurmountable mountain. And we look up at this ideal version of somebody who's fit. And we think we're like, all right, well, what do they have in common? They eat a really clean diet, they exercise, and they're disciplined. They stick to the things that they do regularly and consistently over and over again without fail. But what we fail to do is we fail to recognize the rest of the mountain. And the rest of the mountain is just some of the stuff we talked about. One of them is our own individual personal factors. There's the social hierarchy. There's environmental characteristics and individual characteristics. And what's unfortunate, this is one of the common pitfalls, is we just look to the peak. We just look to the top of that mountain. We just think, well, if I just dieted better, if I exercised better, and if I was disciplined enough, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to have a six-pack abs. I'm going to be ripped. I'm going to fit into all the clothes that I want to fit in, and I'll be good. But we ignore all of these other things that are getting in our way. And I think because of that, we're doing ourselves a disservice in actually achieving meaningful weight loss, because without recognizing these factors that all play within our lives, we're not actually engaging in meaningful strategies to actually lose weight. So we come back to this definition of what is obesity. It's a chronic, relapsing, multifactorial, neurobehavioral disease. Whereas an increase in body fat promotes adipose tissue dysfunction, abnormal fat mass, physical forces resulting in adverse metabolic, biomechanical, and psychosocial health consequences. It was a mouthful then, it's still a mouthful now. And I'm hoping that you can appreciate the complexity of this topic, that I cannot possibly do diligence within an hour. I just can't. There's not enough time to talk about all of these factors, but I'm hoping that you can actually appreciate it for what it is. And it's a much more complex process than calories in, calories out, that you're not motivated enough, that you're not disciplined enough. It's a much deeper, much more sinister problem. So then what do? Some of the common pitfalls that people will fall into is we focus too much on our lag indicators. And these are basically indicators that are measures of your past performance, meaning the systems you put in place before, that's what your lag indicator shows up as. So we look at our weight scale, we look at our diet, are we sticking to our dietary habits? But again, we're focusing on the wrong thing. If you just started changing your lifestyle today, you're looking at your weight week to week, hoping that it's going to change. You're focusing on your lag indicator. It's the wrong problem, because you have to look at all of the other things in the background that are contributing to the excessive weight gain. And instead of focusing on lag indicators, we're not focusing on the lead indicators, which are, have we made a meaningful, small, even if it's a small, consistent change in our lifestyle, be it in our physical activity, be it in our diet, are we sticking to that? And if we're sticking to that, that is the indicator that we need to start rewarding ourselves for. It's about identity creation, habit formation. If you remember the person at the bottom of the mountain, the top of the mountain, there's an identity discrepancy or a gap between those two individuals. The person at the bottom of the mountain, in their own minds, is like, well, I'm not that person. I'm not physically fit. I'm not physically active. I'm not an athlete. I don't exercise. I don't work out. I'm not that person. There's an identity issue here. And to change that identity is what are the bigger things. When you start exercising, you exercise. When you start playing sports, you're an athlete. And so instead of focusing on our weight scale, maybe we should be focusing on the things that we want to be doing that will eventually lead us to success. The other problem is people try to do way too many things at once. You see a laundry list of things to do, and we want to try to do all of it. And then when one or many of them start failing, we can't keep up. We just abandon the whole project to begin with. We don't have structured reward systems in place, meaning when we do something that is a better habit or a better behavior, we don't find some way to reward ourselves of it. We think it's something that's not worthy of a reward when it really is, because you're actually changing your lifestyle in a meaningful way. There's not enough emphasis on resistance training, and I see this much more in women than in men. Men love the weights, women hate them. And with resistance training, the big benefit is that if you can increase your muscle mass, you start increasing your body's ability to store carbohydrates. You can eat more carbs and not have to keep it as fat because you have more muscle, relatively speaking. And muscle, it prevents injury. It really keeps the needle moving forward. And as we get older, our muscle mass is just declining year over year. Whether we lift or not, it's declining year over year. And to offset this, we do need to incorporate some form of resistance training in our day-to-day lives every day. Because the older we get, the less muscle we have, the less we're able to do the things that we used to do when we were in our 20s, 30s, and 40s. And that doesn't have to be the case. We also try to do this on our own. we don't tell enough people, we don't have the appropriate supports that we need in place to actually climb the mountain. So when we look at the mountain again, and how do we get up that mountain? How do we make this identity shift? Instead of just focusing on diet, exercise, and discipline, which we start off by doing, this is typically the first three that are highlighted here. These are the things that everyone does on January 1st. All right, I'm gonna start cleaning up my diet. I've printed out this diet plan. I'm gonna start meal prepping. I'm gonna do this thing. I'm gonna get that gym membership, and I'm gonna go for the whole year. And come March, you're not going anymore. I'm gonna get a Fitbit. That's gonna track my fitness. That'll keep me accountable. I'm gonna farm out my discipline to something else. Instead of developing that, now these things, they work. I'm not saying that they don't work, but they don't work for the state that you're at. If you're struggling with obesity in general, these are not the things that are going to move your needle much more. These are the things that are going to get you from 90 to 100%, not from 10 to 80%. The things that get you from 10 to 80% are much different. It's addressing a lot of these issues down here at the bottom end of the mountain. And the first one is a lot of these medications. It's Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, Mounjaro. While they're not a fix, they're definitely a symptom treatment. What they're doing is effectively medicating the environment. We're not changing the environment. We're not changing any of the social structures in place. We're not changing any of the political systems in place. But this is the role that I actually truly believe that medications have in it. I've never once wrote a prescription for any one of these medications, not in the line of work that I do. I don't get any kickbacks from any of these drugs, but I do think that there's a strong reason for, especially when when your body's on fire. When you are struggling with weight loss and you're already having signs of end organ damage or issues because of excess weight in your body, these medications, I think, are a lifesaver. And the purpose for them is to allow you some time and space to build the rest of your system, which we'll get into next, which is, there's a list, a mile long here of things that we can individually be doing to combat these societal and environmental forces that are acting against us to lose weight. I'll highlight a couple of them. One is surrounding yourself with people who act as cheerleaders in your weight loss journey. And it's challenging to find people like that. There are people in our lives that we know who are physically fit and healthy, and we'll go to them, be like, yo, bro, what do you do? How do you lose weight? Oh, bro, all you gotta do is you gotta do 3 sets and you gotta come work out with me. And more often than not, these people, they might show you a path, but long term, you have to be careful with who you're letting in on your journey. Because if somebody is going to be putting you down for the things that you're not doing, they're missing the point. If you want to support somebody on their weight loss journey, there's no bigger critic, there's no person more motivated to actually lose weight than the person who's losing the weight themselves. They are already their own harshest critic. If you want to help them lose weight, don't be another voice. Don't add to that already negative self-talk that's in there of, I can't do it, it's too hard, I've tried before and failed. You don't want to be that voice. You want to be the opposite voice for these people, to give them some kind of lift and motivation to allow them to continue. It's like, hey, it's okay. You didn't go today, no problem. You went last week though. We'll pick it back up, let's keep going. You want people like that in your life. CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for weight loss. It has been shown to actually help people lose weight because it's a mindset shift. It allows you to change the way you perceive your environment, your self-perceptions, so you start making better choices. You make better behavioral choices. So if you have the privilege and the resources to get CBT directly for weight loss, it's something that I think is definitely worth doing. Hiring a coach and trainer, nutrition and dietitian. I think there's a place for all of these ancillary health professionals as well. The other one was tackling our own environment. So taking stairs instead of elevators. It's going to take a lot longer to get to places, but it'll force you to actually physically move. If you work from home, getting a sit-stand desk. And if you have a sit-stand desk, use it. and use it in a way that actually makes sense. That if you're able to stand while you're working, just stand. If it's something that does require more cognitive energy and requirement of you, you sit down. A lot of people, one of the first things they did was go out and buy a sit-stand desk, but they never actually use it. They don't use it on a regular basis. For the food portion sizes, as a baseline, when you go to a restaurant, as a habit, you just ask them for a takeout container to go right off the bat. Pack away a quarter of the food to maybe take for later, because we already know portion sizes are too big. So if you can artificially lower that portion size for yourself, you might still go back. You'll still go back and eat the rest of the quarter, even in the same sitting. That's fine. The idea is you can just make it that much harder for you to do so. Displacing calories, so displacing all liquid calories with water, trying to set up some kind of system within your house that's allowing you to eat healthier foods first. So if you want to have your junk food, you want to have your chips, you want to have your cookies and milk at night, eat a plate of fruits first. And then you've earned the right to then have your cookies and milk, guilt-free. You want to have chips, have a pile of nuts or seeds or something like that at the bedside or at the table or on the couch. You eat those first, and you've had them. Go have your chips. It's about displacing calories gradually over a period of time to things that are more nutritionally dense versus just calorically dense. And then finally, we get to bariatric surgery, which again, it has a place in people who have tried all of these things and are not able to succeed. These are the strategies that I'm proposing. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, my hope of this talk was really to provide you with an alternative framework for thinking about weight loss. That it's not just this recipe list of these are the things you need to do, but change the way you think on how to lose weight. I've listed a few strategies here, but I'm hoping that with this talk, that you're able to come up with some of these strategies on your own. Go to the next slide. There's a saying in a book, you do not rise to the level of your goal, you fall to the level of your systems. And the plea I'm making is to change your system. I can't change it for you. You can change it for yourself, and you know what your system is. It requires a lot of deep diving and looking into really being honest about yourself, about the factors that are playing against you and what you can do to overcome those factors. I really appreciate everybody for showing up today. I'm privileged. I feel privileged to be able to give this talk to you. I thank Saad and the organizers at MNN for allowing me to give you this talk, and the support for people who are in attendance and people online, people who are not here, to give me the courage to do this talk. If you got anything out of this, it would mean a lot to me, or if you didn't, it would mean a lot to me and the organizers for you to scan that QR code and provide some kind of feedback. Is this something that you got some benefit out of? If it was something you did not get any benefit out of, is this something you could see being done differently? How would you do it better? Please give feedback. It can allow me or the organization or institution to provide you with content like this that actually makes a meaningful difference in your life. Jazakallah khairan. I'll open it up to questions.
Yes, we've got a few questions in. And once again, if anybody has any questions right now, you can either raise your hand or scan the QR code and drop it in anonymously. But we'll go through some of the questions. So when or in which type of patients are drugs like Ozempic beneficial?
Great question. As I alluded to earlier in the talk, it's really with people who, I would say, if you're starting out on this journey and you already know that you're behind the 8 ball, as it were, your BMI is more than 30, you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, or you have hypertension, or you have hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol, and if you don't have them, you're taking medications for them. A lot of people will say, oh, I don't have high blood pressure, but I'm on these 3 antihypertensives. You have high blood pressure. If you have medications for these conditions and your BMI is over 30, just take the meds. Just start the Ozempic. That's a great question. Thank you.
Next question. Is obesity-related illness/pain reversible?
Yes, it is. That's a very good question. Thank you for that as well. The question was, is obesity-related pain or chronic pain, is it reversible? The answer is yes, it is. It's about chronic pain about as complex a topic than obesity is. There's a lot of things that impact chronic pain. A lot of them have to do with some lifestyle. A lot of them have to do with perceptions. But many of these factors are changeable. The difficulty is that people lack the resources to change it. Pain is one of those things that is perceived. It's not measurable. If somebody gets an MRI for low back pain, you take my age, I'm 40. Yeah, take 10 people in my age group. You'll find about 6 to 7 of them have some form of degenerative changes in their spine, easily, with some form of herniated discs. Now, you could have those same people and be entirely pain-free. And there's some people who are living in devastating pain. The pain is not it doesn't correlate to findings on an MRI. You cannot diagnose pain like that medically. It's a perception. Pain only exists within the brain. It really only does. And so if you can change certain pathways, if you can change your biomechanics of how you physically move, the elasticity and the strength and pliability of the soft tissues, the muscles, the tendons, the ligaments that surround the bones, you can actually work to reverse chronic pain. That's a great question.
Next question is, what are some healthy foods that keep you feeling full? Sometimes I try to eat healthy food like a plate of salad, but I'm left feeling hungry.
That's a great question. So salads, they're not super satiating for sure, but foods that tend to be a little bit higher in protein and fat content. So the easy one I'll say is meat, because everyone knows what meat is. It's a lot of protein, it's very satiating. But beans, nuts, and legumes, we overlook it. So a salad can also have beans in it. It can have chickpeas in it. It can have seeds, nuts in it. And these foods are also better. They're higher in protein and fat content, and just the foods themselves, more protein and fat, can help you feel full faster. Protein shakes, I do think that there's some role here. If you have them before a meal and you do already struggle with feeling full, have the protein shake before your meal. That unto itself will help decrease levels of hunger. Any other questions? Please. The question is intermittent fasting, can it be used to lose a lot of weight? Yeah, it can. It actually can. It's, like I said from before in the talk, it's not the end-all be-all though. It's one of many dietary patterns and habits that can help you lose weight, but it unto itself won't do it. Does that answer your question? Sorry, say that again. You have to follow another? Okay. No, you don't. You don't have to follow another diet with it. You have. When we go back, if we go back to this slide here, there's so many other factors. Intermittent fasting is the top left portion up here, where it says diet plans. That's the role that intermittent fasting has. It's one small aspect of many other changes that need to be had. So it's not just a simple matter of just, oh, if I get on this diet or that diet, I'm going to lose my weight. There's all those other factors that need to be put in place. Does that answer your question a little bit better? Thank you. Please.
Many times I heard about that protein shakes are not healthy. As a Muslim also, the ingredients which mostly are being mentioned, they are not allowed in our Islam. And also the other thing is that they are medically also mentioned that the protein shakes remain in your body or your stomach. They don't flush out from your stomach. What is the...
So, sorry, there's a couple of questions. One is that they're not healthy. The second is that they have ingredients that are not halal. The third is that they don't flush out.
do not flush out. They stay in your stomach and in your guts and everything, and they don't flush out just like clear out your stomach.
Okay, that's a very good question.
Stomach heavy and feels you full.
Yeah, those are good questions. So to answer the first question of that they're not healthy, again, I think it falls into a bit of the trap of like we got to be perfect with everything we're doing. And if I told you to eat 30 grams of chicken breast, that's going to be healthier than a protein shake. But the reality is you're not going to do it. It's just you're not. A protein shake is healthier than the alternative, is what I'm proposing. It's not the healthiest, 100%, I'll give you that. But it's better than nothing. That's the argument. The second argument about it not being halal or having haram ingredients, I'm not quite sure of what you're referring to. You can find.
Now it is showing many videos on the different multimedia platforms that protein shakes are mostly being made by some insects and
A bulk of protein is whey protein, which ends up being a breakdown of leftover casein from milk or soybeans. That's my understanding of protein. If somebody here has more knowledge on the matter, please speak up. But my understanding of it is that there's not much in there that's actually haram. The third question you had was doesn't flush out. I think that's a great thing. Again, it feeds one of it is better, not perfect. The second is if it makes you feel full longer, that's kind of the point, is that you're eating less over time. The third part of it is, well, it doesn't flush out of your body. Neither do Doritos chips. Neither does roti and naan. Neither does rice. Again, it's not about being perfect. It's about just being a little bit better than before. So yeah, they're not the perfect solution, but they're a better solution than having that extra serving of biryani, is the hypothesis or the proposition I'd like to make. Any other questions? Sleep and the question is sleep and its relation to weight loss. What's the question in there? Yep. Okay, that's a good question. So if I could share it with everyone. So for people who struggle with having sustained sleep throughout a night, end up having to break it up, they'll get the total of 8 hours or more, but they'll scatter it out throughout the course of naps. Now, there's a time and place for it, but we know with sleep is a physical state, and there's a lot of hormonal pathways that happen within sleep. There's a lot of regenerative processes, both neurologically and both physically. One of those physical regenerative processes is the release of growth hormone and the suppression of cortisol. Growth hormone is a substance that our body will generate to allow us to, it makes it easier for us to preserve muscle mass. It decreases our insulin resistance. And studies have shown that the longer time you spent in uninterrupted deep sleep, the more growth hormone release there is. So that's point one. The point two about cortisol is when you have interrupted sleep and you wake up with insufficient sleep, your cortisol levels are high. Cortisol is another one of these stress hormones that it increases insulin resistance, increases central adiposity, and it causes your adrenal glands to fire in this perpetual fight or flight response. You're surging tons of adrenaline or noradrenaline, epinephrine, just to kind of function in life. And with chronic cortisol release, we know because it just sets you up with more insulin resistance, it's going to make it easier for you to continue to gain weight. That's from a hormonal pathway. From a physical pathway, if you wake up and you feel tired and you feel fatigued, are you going to go for a run? Probably not. Does that answer your question? Good question. Please.
that stress and anxiety can lead to weight gain and also can stop you to lose your weight, and also what is stress eating, because I'm facing this thing.
So
Why we do stress eating?
So a couple of questions. One is, why do we do stress eating? I'll answer that one first. Stress eating, it's a behavioral response, and it's because we want to feel good at the base of it. Stress is, or feeling anxiety and feeling bad, feeling depressed, they're emotions, and we are not taught how to just sit with the emotion. our job, what we've been taught from a very young age is to either suppress the emotion, meaning pretend it doesn't exist, or get over it. Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you feeling stressed? What do you have to feel stressed about? You should be grateful for all of these things and all this stuff. We're never taught how do you just deal with the stress and just honor it for what it is. We've been told in our religion that we will be tried and tested. And what is that if not stress? Our job is not to avoid stress. Our job is to stay in stress. And so stress eating is a behavioral response that we engage in just so we don't have to feel the stress. So that's what stress eating is. The solution to it is to learn how to be okay with feeling stressed or anxious or being depressed and sad and not blaming it. It's not a cognitive thing. It's not something that you're consciously choosing to do. It's an emotion. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a feeling. But if you can let that feeling come and go without having to act on the feeling, that reduces your cravings or the stress eating or the binges and purges that people do. I don't know, does that answer your question about what is stress eating?
I also asked that other than stress eating,
Yes.
stress and anxiety can lead your weight increase.
They can, but they might not also. Some people who are very stressed and anxious, in fact, a lot of people who struggle with anxiety, they don't eat. They move, they pace, they move around.
I'm saying not about, I'm not relating stress, anxiety with the stress eating.
Yep.
Don't want to eat a day. Even it happens that many people don't even eat that much because I'm also passing that phase that with stress and anxiety, even I'm fasting for full months. Even then, I'm not losing weight. I'm not even I'm eating one meal a day
Yep.
and very little meal. Even then, I'm gaining my weight.
Yep. What's the question? Is the stress and anxiety adding to it?
Stress and anxiety can lead you to weight gain and can't make you decrease your weight.
The short answer to that question is yes. There are many instances where it might not. It's not the only factor, though. And I can't stress that enough. If we go back to the pyramid, there are so many other factors that, again, if you take nothing away from the talk, I want you to take this point away, is that there's so many factors. It's never just one thing. It's never just your mental health. It's never just your behaviors. There's societal forces, there's personal forces, there's social hierarchy, there's environmental characteristics. There are so many things. And when we get into the habit or we get into the thought process of if I just fix this one thing, everything will be better. That's not how it works. And not only that, but you're setting yourself up for failure. Because all you keep doing is you eat less, your basal metabolic rate drops, you have more fatigue, you're not moving quite as much, and your human compensatory response is saying, okay, well, this person is fat, this person doesn't have food, so I'm going to hold on to the fat as best as possible. And those days where your willpower gives up and it's like, oh, I'm hungry, I want to eat something, and you finally eat something, you're going to put on weight because your metabolic rate is down here and you're not moving. So it's not just stress and anxiety in your circumstance. There's so many factors here at play. Does that answer your question? Sorry. So the question is there's two questions. One is existing in a perpetual state of a caloric deficit going to continually cause you to have a lower metabolism? And the second one was? You think about it, I'll answer the first one. First one is, so the question was, is existing in a perpetual state of a caloric deficit going to continually cause you to have a decreased metabolic rate? The answer is no, because it's not a simple matter of calories in, calories out. There are other hormone factors at play, and one of them is ghrelin and the other is leptin. And these are factors, these are hormonal signaling pathways that signal to us hunger and satiety. And so the goal is not necessarily to be in a caloric deficit. That's not the end all be all. It's to feel full. And when we deprive of ourselves of feeling full, that's when we start getting these harmful pathways, because our ghrelin level goes through the roof and our leptin level tanks. And so when people exist in an intentional caloric deficit and they're hungry, that lowers your basal metabolic rate. If you're in a caloric deficit perpetually and you feel full, your metabolic rate doesn't tank, because you're still moving, you're still physically active, you're still putting on muscle. If you're consuming large amounts of protein, if you're adding muscle mass while staying in a caloric deficit, that's the holy grail. If you can continue that, because with more muscle, your furnace burns hotter. You burn more calories without doing anything. I still remember this. In a physically kind of normal, active individual, your physical activity metabolic burns about 10 to 15% of your total energy expenditure. 10 to 15%, which means about 80% of the time you're burning calories just sitting there on your butt. And the goal is to have a more efficient furnace where you're burning calories doing nothing. That's the goal. Like rich people, they make money by not working. You want to be skinny by not having to lift and run all the time. Good question. For weight loss specifically, I'm going to say no, because I want to really reemphasize this point that it's not just one thing. But if you really ask me, it's like, hey, Adnan, like, I got all these things. I sorted through all this stuff. I got rid of my negative self-talk. I've done a CBT program. I got people in my corner. I got a soccer club, and I got a gym club, and I got a soccer club, and I'm good. Like, I'm good on all those things. Yeah, you need a supplement? Yeah, fine, go get some protein, no problem. But like, there's so many other steps to get to before there, because the diet, the exercise is like at the top of the mountain. And if you have excessive weight here, like you're playing with like just fine increments here. Whereas I'm talking about like deeper systemic change that I really want to impart upon people. Good question. Oh, congrats. It's amazing. Yeah. Yep. The answer is yes. Pick one. Pick one or more of these things that, if you're truly honest with yourself, are you doing all of these things? Do you have people in your corner who are helping you? There are many things that you can do to break through a plateau. It's not, I want to reemphasize the point that it's not a lack of willpower. It's not a lack of discipline. You have it. You've done it already. You've gone from like at the bottom of the mountain and you're working your way up. You've already started. This is not a willpower issue. We're talking about constructing a system. It's entirely divorced from this concept of having willpower. It's a process. It's not hard for you. So the plateau you're at is, I don't know. I don't know you well enough, but there's somewhere else within this list of problems, somewhere in here, that you can do. I don't know what your work life is. Do you bike to work? Do you not bike to work? Do you walk? How much do you walk in the day? Do you go up and down the stairs? Do you ask your mom to just do everything for you? Like, I don't know. But if you're able to find other ways, that's going to actually lead you to meaningful, sustained weight loss. You've already probably done a bulk of like the diet, the gyms, all that stuff. There's all this other stuff to think about. No, please. That's right. I'm an emergency room doctor, and I do some occupational health medicine in Oakville. Yeah. Have I? Never. No. No. Yeah. 100%. This is genetic. Yeah. This is genetic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question, answer your first question, which is when my blood sugar drops throughout the day, what should I do? My sugar levels drop throughout the day. One thing I have to say about that is it actually dropping? Are you physically checking your blood sugar? That's the question. You don't have to answer these. But first thing is, are you actually checking your blood sugar? Most people have this perceived feeling that they're hypoglycemic and they're not. They just feel tired. The second is, are you on insulin? If you're not on insulin, this is probably not a problem for you because we have one hormone, which is insulin, that's designed to drop our blood sugar, just one, and we have about 5 or 6 designed to raise it. Glucagon, cortisol, like there's a whole host of hormones in our body that are designed to prop us up. Hypoglycemia only exists really in diabetics on insulin, more specifically type 1 diabetics. It doesn't happen to the average person. So I would really challenge that idea then. Maybe you're not actually hypoglycemic, maybe you're just hungry. Could be something entirely different. Doesn't have to be hypoglycemia. But then the question is, what do I do? You find some kind of healthy snack to prop it up. Plate of fruits and vegetables. Again, and the answer to your second question is no, I'm not going to give you a diet. That's something you have to do. There's a system that you have to construct to be able to meaningfully sustain weight loss. And the difficulty when we're trying to change a diet is we're not just trying to change our diet. We're trying to change the diet of everyone in the home, realistically speaking, because it's impractical for you to then cook one meal for yourself and then another meal for the rest of your family. It just doesn't work. Again, it's one of the other reasons why we struggle with weight loss is we make it too hard than it actually needs to be. So I would say to you is, I don't know, I can't tell you what structured diet plan you should follow, but rather one that have more fruits, more vegetables, more nuts, more seeds, more legumes, less meat, more fish, more fiber in your diet. You have to figure that part out on your own. Any other questions? Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, are there carbs that are good and healthy, and there are carbs that are bad that you should stay away from? To reemphasize, carbs are not the enemy. It's not the enemy. We're supposed to eat carbs. Ideally, you want to have more complex carbs, meaning carbs that don't break down very quickly and just flood into your body and take time. So it could be like a plate of vegetables. Yeah, potatoes can be one, but so can a plate of salad. You could have, I don't know, you could have dal if you want to. You could have oatmeal, cottage cheese. Like there's so many things that they have some carbs in it. But yeah, no, there's plenty of carbs that are healthy. They tend to be more complex carbs. They tend to fall more into the realm of fruits, nuts, vegetables, seeds. Those things can help, and they're not the enemy. We'll just take this, yeah. So the question is, there's two questions. One is it harder to lose weight at the age of 35 to 40? And two is it because our metabolism slows down? One is yes, 100%, but it's not necessarily for that reason. The bigger reason is because of your behaviors. The older we get, the more stubborn we get, the more in our ways we get, the more ingrained in our patterns of behavior we get. And so if it took you 30, 35 years to get to the body that you're at, that means you have to change something on how you live your day-to-day life. We have this belief of like you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it's true with humans because they don't want to be, we don't want to be taught. I want to lose the weight, but I don't want to change a thing I'm doing. I don't want to have to go to the gym. I don't want to have to go up and down the stairs. I don't have to get up and change the TV on the remote on the TV. I don't want to have to move. I'm old. I just want to sit. I just want it to be comfortable for me. And there's nothing wrong with that. I feel that way all the time. Oh, I got to do this again? I don't want to. But it's less so because of your losing muscle mass and more so because of behaviors and habit. The second part is yes, you are losing muscle mass as you get older, and that is why your metabolism slows down. But you can do a lot to preserve your muscle mass, and a lot you can do to preserve your basal metabolic rate. And a large portion of that is resistance training, lifting weights, trying to build more muscle. Very possible. Very possible. Life catches up. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very possible. Very possible. There's a lot of people who've lost weight well into their 60s. You see the huge transformations that happen. The key is really how do you sustain the weight loss? Have you ever watched the show Biggest Loser? There's a reality show back in the day where people who were like 400 or 500 pounds, and they could be 40 or 50 years old, they would lose 200, 300 pounds. The issue with that show was that they didn't keep the weight off. You can lose the weight. It's been shown time and time again. No matter what age you're at, you could be 60 and you can lose weight. Hundreds of pounds of weight. But what I'm proposing here with this is how do you keep the weight off without having cameras on you, without having, once the cameras are turned off and it's just you, like there's so many factors here that can lead to sustained weight loss. The question is intermittent fasting good for prolonged periods of time? For women specifically, I'm not aware of anything specifically unique to women that's different than men that would make it more deleterious in women compared to men. But again, it's not an easy question because there's some people who intermittently fast and when they do it properly, meaning they're full, they're satiated, they work out in the times when they're fasting. Most people who intermittently fast, they don't. During Ramadan, how many people go to the gym? How many people do any physical activity in Ramadan? It just drops. So it's not that intermittent fasting unto itself is bad. It's what else happens around it. If you can have enough sleep in your life, if you can feel full enough, and if you have enough time, energy, and space to then go work out, build muscle, and then have high protein levels, there's nothing wrong with intermittent fasting. You can lose weight and gain muscle with intermittent fasting, but there's, again, I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritties of diet. I know that's what everyone here came to talk about. I can't underemphasize or overemphasize all of these other parts of the mountain that nobody's talking about. Negative self-talk, how do you get to work every day? Like these are big things that actually matter. They matter a lot in weight loss, and it's not just, if intermittent dieting good or bad for me. Those are things at the top of this. I intentionally constructed this in a way that they should be going in order of decreasing priority. Diet plans are like much lower down on that list. There are many other behavioral components because if we remember the definition of obesity, it's a neurobehavioral disease. It's not necessarily a metabolic disease, it's a neurobehavioral disease, meaning the things we're doing on a day-to-day is what's getting us into trouble. Yeah, fine, intermittent fasting, sure, it can help. But so there's like 10 other things too. Thank you so much. I think that'll be all the questions for today. Thank you guys for coming out. Please fill out the feedback form. Jazakallah khair.
Coming out. And yeah, if you guys want, this is something less usual for MNN to do these kinds of programs. Inshallah, we do want to do more health focused.